welcome to 5-Minute Family Law. Today we're talking about how people begin unmarried relationships. If you remember from past episodes, family law is all about whether or not you fit into a slot, and the slots are labeled things like parent, spouse, guardian, child. Because if you fit into those slots, you have rights and responsibilities that you wouldn't have if you didn't fit into those slots. One of the most important slots is the one labeled spouse. Under the Provincial Family Law Act, there are 3 ways you can be a spouse. You can be a spouse because you're married to someone else. You can be a spouse because you've lived with someone else in a marriage-like relationship for at least 2 years. Or you can be a spouse because you've lived with someone else in a marriage-like relationship for less than 2 years, but you've had a child together. And it's that second and third kind of spouse, the unmarried kind, that we're going to be talking about today. So what's important about being an unmarried spouse, and some people call unmarried spouses common law partners or common law spouses, is that idea about being in a marriage-like relationship. Now, that's critically important because obviously you don't want to wake up one morning and discover that you've become a spouse to a family member or to your roommate. So the problem, though, is that the Family Law Act doesn't tell us in any great detail what a marriage-like relationship is, and so we have to look at the case law. So one of my favorite decisions was a case from Saskatchewan called Yakiwchuk and Oaks, and in that case, the judge is trying to define what marriage-like means by reference to marriages. And so the judge goes on for easily a page talking about how in marriages some couples hold hands and others, the spouses, don't. Some married spouses share meals together and sleep together, others don't. Some married couples go on vacations together and others don't. And the judge goes on about this for quite some length, and the point is that what's a marriage-like relationship or not depends on the circumstances. Now, closer to home, in British Columbia, our Court of Appeal, in a case called Takacs and Gallo, approved of an Ontario case called Yakiwchuk. Now, in Takacs and Gallo, what the court says is that there are more or less these objective things that you can consider. For example, shelter. Did the parties live under the same roof? What were their sleeping arrangements like? What was their sexual and personal behavior? Did they have sex together? Did they go out as a couple? Did they communicate on a personal level? Did they eat meals together? Social. Did they participate together or separately in neighborhood and community activities? Societal. What did the community think that the relationship between the parties was? Support. What were the financial arrangements between the parties about the contribution towards the cost of food, clothing, shelter, and things like that? Did they share bank accounts? Did they commingle their finances and all those other things? So what is marriage like and what's not is going to depend on the particular circumstances of the particular family in front of the court. But think about it in those big terms. I mean, we're talking about basic stuff. Do you present to other people as a couple? Do people look at you and think that you're a couple? Do you do chores for each other? Do you share bank accounts? Do you pay for things for each other? Do you have kids together? Do you sleep in the same bed? And all those other things go into what makes a relationship marriage-like or not. So, now that you've decided whether or not your relationship is marriage-like, the next question is, when did your relationship become a spousal relationship? And that's important because the date that your relationship as spouses begins is the date of the beginning of your relationship for the purposes of spousal support calculations. It's also the date on which you begin to accumulate shared family property. And so, remember the test. You've lived together in a marriage-like relationship for at least 2 years. All right, well, we've got the living together part established. We've got the marriage-like relationship established. And then, once the second anniversary rolls around, that's the date on which your relationship is officially spousal under the Family Law Act. But the date you became spouses was the date 2 years ago when you first moved in to live together, or the date 2 years ago when your relationship first became marriage-like. It's the same thing if you're that other kind of unmarried spouse where you've lived together and had a child. So, you've lived together in a marriage-like relationship and you've had a child. The moment you've lived together in a marriage-like relationship and that child is born, that's the date that you are officially spouses. But the date that your relationship as spouses began was the date going back in time when your relationship first became marriage-like, or the date that you first began to live together. And so that is how you become an unmarried spouse in British Columbia.